The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spinoff or wherever you get your podcasts. Kia ora koutou and welcome to Gone by Lunchtime, New Zealand's best dressed monthly political podcast from your friends at the navel-gazing corporate shill hot take factory, the Spinoff. My name is Toby Manhire, and in the pod today, the dream team of Annabelle Lee and Ben Thomas. Annabelle is, of course, executive producer of the unmissable Sunday morning current affairs triumph, The Hui. And you've been greenlit for another year. Annabelle, is that public knowledge?
From three, yes, but we're waiting to hear back from Te Māngai Pāhua New Zealand On Air. I thought you might intro me as the daughter of Sea Goblin.
Oh, gosh. I wondered whether or not you'd see that.
Yes, I saw that.
And speaking of your parentage, you were just telling us about the crazy years in Waiheke.
Crazy years on Waiheke is such good
Sandra
times.
and Mike.
Pre-vineyard days.
You missed a lot, listeners.
When it was hippies and like roaming packs of lesbians and sailors.
Wow.
It was the heady, wonderful days of Waiheke in its prime, I must say.
What age were you during that?
We moved over when I was about 3 and I was there until I was 16.
Wow. Your formative years, very
formative
much.
Years, that's right.
Wow, really are a child of Waiheke. Ben, meanwhile, you were telling us before we came on about some of your best tweets. Ben Thomas. I should introduce you properly.
Please
Ben Thomas.
At Ben Thomas NZ. Some highly underrated sexual innuendo pre-Māori civilization tweets. Oh. Surprisingly narrow audience.
Do they do better than your craft beer tweets? That's your other.
The craft beer tweets are the only thing keeping me afloat. That's about 80% of my income these days.
Ben Thomas comes to us direct and live from the public relations megacorp Exceltium, who operate in the shadows of New Zealand political life.
Are they still located in Gotham City, or?
Someone made a joke, I think it was Todd Nile, who's quite a funny man, that now it would be called Gotham City, thanks to the election of...
That's awesome.
I'm so glad local body elections are over.
Me too. Me too. Me too.
We will eventually get to Aaron Smith and sex in a disabled toilet. But first, we are going to deal with the Phil Goff situation. And then we'll make our way through Hobson's pledge, by-elections, Marama Davidson on the high seas. Phil Goff, though, Gotham City.
Gotham City.
I mean, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I was one of the people who said, I think Phil Goff is going to win this election.
A bold call, a young tyro just appeared out of nowhere. It's really hard to get enthused about these things, this kind of triennial sort of name recognition contest. Phil Goff should have probably been crowned about a year ago when he first threw his well-trod name into the hat. Yeah.
You went out on a limb there, Toby, and I admire your courage. So
I also
the hat to
was going against the grain saying some time ago that I thought Donald Trump was a bad man. And I feel vindicated as well on that front.
Well, I think that's still yet to be proven, to be fair, Toby. I think there's nothing wrong with Trump.
In a way, you're just appealing to the base.
He's a cat man.
Did the mayoral election, the local body election, excite you? Annabelle, you had a debate on the Hui.
We did. We had a good debate on the Hui. What I found interesting about it's a hard thing when you're hosting a debate because obviously, in this case, there was 19 candidates and you can't host 19 candidates in half an hour for a debate. So we relied on the Spinoff's polling,
dear.
and we took the top 3 candidates. But because there's such a low voter turnout and low participation of Māori in local government, we thought we would get Tyrone Raumati to be one of our candidates to appear. And of course we're funded by Te Māngai Pāho, so it'd be nice to have a candidate who spoke Māori. And the vitriol that came out of that, particularly from Penny Bright and Chloe Shawbrick supporters, was just unbelievable. And the great irony of it was in their numerous tweets and Facebook posts is that they support kaupapa Māori, and Chloe's even studied the treaty, and yet they resented that a Māori candidate appeared on our program over them. So it's quite an interesting insight into the minds of how these local government people and their supporters work.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, these
listeners,
you know, you couldn't fit a paperclip between what Vic Crone and Phil Goff and to a lesser extent, you know, Polino was offering. Everyone was saying that they're going to keep rates low, they're not going to borrow any more money, but they're going to vastly increase expenditure, and they're not going to sell assets. You know, I think the democratic kind of aspect of local body elections is really overstated. You know, you could do just as well to abolish all local government in New Zealand and replace it with the Department of Parks and Sewage.
Well, Len Brown, as the first mayor of the super city, has actually achieved quite a lot in some regard. I mean, in terms of, even if you just look at the CRL, the Central Rail Link, that's quite an impressive achievement, isn't it?
Yeah, but if you had a central agency looking at cities' public transport, I don't think you'd lose too much. You know, Auckland Transport is already run as a council-controlled organisation, so that's already sort of at arm's length from the councils. Len Brown he doesn't have any way of paying for the CRL yet. But because he wants to keep rates down, keep borrowing down, and increase expenditure. I think this it sort of reminds me a lot of elections in places like North Korea or something, where basically everyone knows who they have to vote for. It's Phil Goff, right? When you get into by the time you get through this booklet that you're given to the district health boards, where there's sort of 30 candidates, there's no real sort of rational choice happening there in the voter's mind.
Those were the views of Ben Thomas of Exceltium and did not represent the views of Annabelle Lee, or Toby Manhire, or the Spinoff. North Korea, dictatorships. Would you do away, Annabelle, with local body elections, or do you think they serve a...
No, I wouldn't do away with them. But what I think is interesting, we're going to be talking later about 20 years of MMP, and you look at local government and you think, wow, you guys could probably do with a bit of MMP, because it's by and large, middle-aged to old white guys, very, little representation for anyone else. Sea goblin. I think New Zealand's got a lot of work to do in that department. And, Andrew Rudd, we've had all the kerfuffle down there, and, of course, no Māori have been elected in Taranaki, New Plymouth. So I think it's still not representative of communities, and it's such an important thing, local government for Māori, because that's where the rubber hits the road in terms of resource management, land, all of those sorts of issues.
Sir Geoffrey Palmer, in his draft constitution for New Zealand,
Thomas is a big fan.
proposes making local government constitutionally enshrined in New Zealand. Right now, it's just a statutory creation. It's about the same level as the racing board, really, in terms of constitutional standing. I can't think of anything more preposterous. Basically just enshrining an extra franchise for old white men.
But there is definitely that whole democratic deficit that people talk about is pronounced, isn't it, in local body elections in a range of ways. And you get as far down the form as the district health board, and basically you have no idea who the fuck any of these people are, and you're asked to rank them from 1 to 26. It's the first time you get the opportunity to use single transferable vote in the local body elections in Auckland, I'm talking about at least. And I mean, please. I mean, that's a joke. It's just a lottery, really, or how many mates you can round up.
Single transferable vote is the preferred electoral system of teenage wargame nerds and people with PhDs in political science. It's for people who really enjoy the act of voting and for whom it's a sort of triennial highlight.
I think it's not a bad thing if you know who you're voting for to be able to... Yeah. I think that's part of the problem with MMP is that people almost over-strategise and they spend a lot of time thinking about voting against who they don't want rather than voting for who they do actually want. And I think you see that a lot in the Māori electorates. They vote to keep people out rather than voting for who they want to put in. A lot of it is sort of fear-based voting almost, whereas I think with single transferable vote, although it's a bit ridiculous when you've never heard of any of the humans on the ballot sheet, if you do know who they are, I think it can be actually quite a good thing.
I agree. I think in the mayoralty vote, it should be there. As it turns out, everyone knew that Phil Goff was going to win, so people felt free to vote for your Chloe Swarbrick or whomever anyway without feeling as though they were going to influence the outcome. But if you'd had, if you'd had Polino, Mark Thomas and Vic Crone together achieving, say, 50% more of the vote than Phil Goff, that would seem to me they'd be a bit hard done by, wouldn't they? And because it's just first past the post in Auckland, unlike, say, Wellington, you don't have the opportunity to rank them.
Yeah, look, I just can't see the appeal of it. You know, you get one vote in general. You vote for the party that you want most, and there's no takebacks. I don't think there's any huge philosophical problem with that.
Never fear, we are going to come back to electoral systems for those of you who are enjoying this electoral system chat.
So many of them listening, enjoying
But does anyone else, speaking of places other than Auckland, does anyone else have any thoughts, even one thought, about a local body election that happened outside Auckland?
Yes, I do.
Go.
The Māori guy from Porirua threw his hat in the ring at the last minute. Tana, don't know his first name, so I'm assuming he's from Ngāti Hine or something, and he won. So that's cool.
So he took it from Nick Leggett, who went from Porirua to go for the Wellington big chair.
You know far more than I. All I know is that some Maori dude won Porirua, and I'm
Maori
very,
dude.
very happy about it. And his last name's Tana. And the other thing is Wairoa has voted to have Māori wards, a Māori ward, which I think is a progressive and good thing. And so they should. A lot of Māori in that community.
So wait, they had a referendum bit, or they voted on council?
So, yeah.
Oh, interesting. These are very interesting things that we only know a very little bit about. So we'll stop there and move on and talk about turnout briefly, which might again excite a few of you voting system fetishists. Ben, some people in the wake of the turnout across the country, I think it was 40%, maybe 36 point something or other in Auckland. There's been a bit of a campaign launched by people saying it's time for online voting. That's how we engage the kids. What's your hot take on that?
Look, in the absence of the sensible alternative of the minister responsible appointing the board of the Department of Sewage and Parks,
this is a very North Korean.
The alternative
is Kim
would be
Jong-un an Exceltium client.
You would. I think that you would absolutely go to online voting. There's, for someone like me, going to a post box and putting an envelope in is every bit as arduous and testing as actually going to a polling station. It doesn't really cut down on the effort at all. Whereas online voting I could do from my desk, and I think that this idea that it's somehow less secure than a postal ballot it seems to be belied by the way that I got at least sort of 6 ballots in my mailbox, from former residents of the house.
Except that I suppose the potential for, excuse me, I'm eating some fudge. Help me here, Annabelle. The risk of fraud on a digital scale is much larger than the risk of gaming a couple of your cousins' voting papers.
I mean, could be that the safeguard against that is that the only people who are involved in local politics are over the age of about 55, and so the potential for hacking is vastly reduced.
I wouldn't have thought so, Toby, to be fair. Is there going to be huge voting cybercrime? Like, where every day trillions of dollars are transferred all around the world using the internet. I think voting in local body elections, we're not going to have the Russians cracking us, are we?
There's a very good piece on the website startup, The Spinoff, by Nigel McNee, which explores some of the rest of very smart web developer dude, programmer, and there are some serious risks. And one of the arguments that's made is why should we risk it here? You know, I mean, where are the good examples that we can point to of it working? And I'm not sure there's actually any evidence, although we sort of assume it to be true, that young people are more likely to vote in an online format. I don't know if that's true.
I definitely don't think we're going to have less young people voting if it's online. And in terms of Māori, given that there's been some really interesting studies done about why Māori don't vote, and a part of it in terms of general elections is just feeling intimidated about walking into a polling booth and not really knowing how it works and what the tikanga of it is. It's not necessarily that they feel completely disengaged from politics. It's more that they haven't been taught, they haven't had whānau, they haven't had parents that go out and vote, and so they don't as well. And because we don't have young Māori don't have security of housing, you know, sending out voting papers is often a bit of a hit and miss exercise as well, whereas they are very active online. They're huge on social media and all of those sorts of platforms. So I think you're more likely to get young Māori voting and engaging in the process if it was available online, but I don't know if that suits, people who currently occupy all of those positions in local government at the moment.
One of the results of Phil Goff winning in Auckland is that it creates a by-election, which means that we get 2 Christmases in December, one on the 25th and one on the 3rd, I think is the likely date. Is that right? For the Mt Roskill by-election. Michael Wood, or is it Woods?
Michael Wood.
Michael Wood.
A university colleague of mine.
Is he?
Yeah, no, I actually think he's a fantastic candidate for them to pick. I think I have known him for about 17 years now, and he has not once deviated from Labour Party talking points. I think he's got exactly the sort of level of kind of discipline and message control that they need.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
When you, but because when you think about it, by-elections are an extraordinary sort of spectacle. You know, the entire press gallery will fly up from Wellington to follow around people who in the normal course of events would, I think currently he's a local board member or something, would normally talk to sort of, the junior reporter at their local rag or something. And there's a lot of pressure.
Leader.
I think the Mount Albert by-election really kind of imploded Melissa Lee's promising career way back in 2009. And so I think it's actually a very prudent choice.
And it's...
I like what Morgan... Did you read Morgan Godfrey's tweet about the Mt Roskill by-election? He said,
Tell us about Morgan Godfrey's tweet.
Because obviously the demographics there are really, diverse, lots of immigrants, Pacifica, all the rest of it. He said that about Michael Wood, I think it was, that if a Pākehā male New Zealander loses Mt Roskill because of his ethnicity, Morgan will eat the Treaty of Waitangi. Retweet it, people. Look for it. Retweet it.
That sounds good. I'm gonna verbally retweet that right now. Which means I'm just gonna read it out again. He said, "Well, the national candidate is likely to be Parmjeet Parmar, who is a List MP currently for National."
Yeah, that's right. And she's been earmarked by a few people as having a pretty promising future, and a lot of that is going to hinge on her performance over the next 2 months.
Didn't she have some sort of shady scandal?
There was some accusations around using
a housing roadshow or something
like that. For
housing officials
I don't
help
know if
cover
anything
it up.
was proven. Lawyers. There's also this People's Party thing that sprung up a while ago. Remember that, which made Winston very cross.
No, what was that
which
one?
is a group of, I think, mostly Indian New Zealanders.
It seemed, yeah.
South Asian anyway, and they're talking about targeting the Mt Roskill seat, and that could play a part, maybe, possibly.
No, I think these sorts of parties pop up every kind of 3 or 4 years. We've had a Pan-Pacific party. I think there was another one called the New Zealand Party at some point.
And Ben is going to be launching the Kim Jong-un party.
Yeah, they all tend to just sort of disappear or become merged into United Future whenever Peter Dunn needs 500 members to register.
Be mean to Peter Dunn. Do they have a chance? Do National have a shot? I mean, I think it's true that a sitting government has never taken a seat away from an opposition party in a by-election, but the National won in the party vote in Mt Roskill in 2014. So
yeah, like I said,
long shot.
Nil shot. I'd say. Michael Wood's very well known. Michael's very well known in the electorate. He's involved in local government there, which is that name recognition thing we were talking about. Labor will devote huge amounts of its limited resources towards this campaign.
And I suppose they don't. I suppose there's no kind of how can I put it, controversy hanging around the departing candidate as there has been in by-elections. The recent past.
That's right.
So Phil Goff is sort of, is going to be lauded as moving on to a bigger, better role in a way. So he doesn't leave any
dirty laundry.
Skid marks.
Yeah. Oh, skid marks, nice. I totally agree with you on that one. I think though, if by chance somehow Labor does lose, and Andrew Little should just quit.
Finished, wouldn't they?
Just have
it
to
would
quit.
It would be
Wouldn't
incredible. They'd just shut down the party. They'd just light a match and say, let's just watch it burn. It's Guy Fawkes anyway. Let's just finish it,
Yeah.
The other thing is it's going to be a straight runoff between National and Labor. Active sort of cleared themselves from the field. The Greens have removed themselves.
Yeah.
I don't think there'll be too much of a problem.
And we've got the Greens on that front, and this takes us through to the birthday of MMP in a way, which has turned 20, which means it can now legally bet in a casino, I think.
Good. Yeah.
The Greens have been accused of hypocrisy because they attack Epsom, and now they're standing aside in Mt Roskill to give Labour blah, blah, blah. It's all this dirty boroughs stuff. Part of me, tell me if I'm wrong, feels like we should just say, stop it with all this, dirty boroughs, rorted seats. It's the system. Do whatever you like. Voters are grown-ups, and if they want to punish you for what they think is a dirty act, then they'll punish. But it's, I just sort of, I get a bit tired of it's just as much as I get tired of listening to Winston Peters bat away another question about what his bottom lines are. I get tired of arguments about whether or not a party standing in a seat or standing aside is somehow, contemptible. Am I right?
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I agree.
Because the thing to remember is that none of the political parties themselves actually believe this when they say it, when they talk about rotten boroughs or dirty deals. They don't think that at all, right? But they know that Paddy Gower in particular and other journalists will take the bait and will try and run it as a scandal. Sorry, I think that was it. I think that was all I had to say.
You were agreeing with me, really.
I think just to loop around, 100% correct.
The only thing I don't like, it's not dirty boroughs, but it's more when it hasn't happened for a long time, but when you have people elected for a certain party on the list who then quit and join another party.
We've had that for a while,
not
haven't
for
we?
a lot. I think Alamein Korpu might have been the last person to do that.
Well, Brendan Horan left
Went independent, but that wasn't
started his own.
Yeah, actually, that's another one.
Was it the Brendan Horan party?
It was the
independent party.
No, it was the Brendan Horan party.
It was not. The MMP more generally, though, Annabelle, 20 years.
20 years.
To think.
Yeah.
Success. I mean, it hasn't been this that we were warned of a kind of these torched landscapes of unstable government, and it hasn't really worked out that way. It's been pretty stable, isn't it?
It's been pretty stable, yeah. I think, Winston Peters in the first MMP election didn't get off to a good start, did it? I don't think that's how people envisaged. It was sort of like the worst case scenario for how MMP might play out. But I think since then it's been by and large pretty good. And, at the time, Māori advocates were saying, MMP stood for more Māori in Parliament, and that's what we've seen. And I think that's been a good thing. And as I said before, by comparison to the level of representation, diversity of representation that you see in local government, MMP's worked well.
And the Māori Party is a very good example of arguably MMP working insofar as that there was a splinter away, but still able to get a foothold in Parliament. And then, they get criticised a lot for, cuddling up to government, but they have achieved things, right?
They have. I think the Greens is probably an even better example because they have been able to maintain their identity as a party, but still get some important runs on the board, insulation, all those sorts of different kaupapa that they've been quite passionate about. They have been able to achieve things outside of government. So
not for a bit. There's nothing in the. I mean, you're right, but not lately, have they? They've gone full oppositional now.
Yeah, that's right, and that might be connected with their memorandum of understanding with Labour, much closer cooperation. What I think, if you look back, the first two MMP governments we had actually collapsed, which was the coalition between New Zealand First and National and then Labour and the Alliance. Both of those sort of ended in quite sort of spectacular fashion.
Tears.
Tears on Waiheke.
And so Helen
Tears
Clark's Helen Clark's innovation in 2002, which was seen as some political scientists had a bit of a worry with it at the time, which was ministers who were not part of the government. So this idea of support parties rather than coalition partners, propping up governments. And that's actually worked much, much better, I think, both for the government and for their support parties, and probably for good government.
It's true, isn't it? I mean, we use the word coalition quite loosely, but I mean, there is no coalition, is there? It's a minority government.
That's right.
The John Key government's have always been minority
with these agreements where they stipulate which legislative change they'll take, to select committee, which they'll support all the way.
Once every 6 weeks,
yeah.
etc. Well, that's enough about MMP. Let's talk about Hobson's pledge and Don Brash. Your colleague Matthew Hooton chided me for talking about Hobson's pledge. He said I wasn't allowed to because it was exactly what they wanted. That this, pathetic liberal whingers like me just provide oxygen. That's an interesting thing. What do you reckon?
I really grapple with that one in terms of our mahi, because on one hand we'd love to have them on and throw them in the studio with Mihi and watch her dissect them, but then at the same time it's sort of giving oxygen, so it's a hard one, that one. I understand where Matthew's coming from, but then at the same time, it can be fun to dissect these people and see and test their arguments and ultimately how weak their arguments are. It's a funny one. I don't know.
No, I think he's got a point, because
there
is that kind of smarmy people who, like me, who lampoon them and stuff, and then it's kind of, look at, blah, 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 blah.
And the thing is, lampooning them often, sort of assumes a level of knowledge about the issue that lots of members of the public don't have.
So speaking of assuming a level of knowledge, can you remind us just what it was, Ben, for people who may not have, what Hobson's pledge was?
So Hobson's pledge is the latest sort of lurching from the grave of former National Party, former ACT leader.
Who forgot to nail the lid closed on him, by the way?
Don Brash, with a kind of an all-star cast of some of New Zealand's most energetic anti-Māori activists, drawing together sort of people from across that kind of limited quasi-racist spectrum, people who oppose Māori seats in local government, treaty deniers, which is a field not a lot of people know about.
Tell us about that.
Well, see, this is an interesting thing. I mean, Don Brash and the Hobson's Pledge people get a lot of criticism for being racist and irrelevant, but they don't get nearly enough credit for their willingness to front up in incredible conspiracy theories in public, just that would make most people sort of, that you would normally associate with sort of homeless people handing out, on the side of a road rather than a former governor of the Reserve Bank. So two of the central conspiracies to this Hobson's Pledge idea. One of them is the long-hidden lost treaty.
The Littlewood Treaty.
So, the you may think that the real Treaty of Waitangi was the one that everyone signed that was at the Waitangi Treaty Grounds, but you would be wrong. The real treaty was discovered in 1988 in the drawer of a desk in South Auckland.
It was in that Magramahi book down the back of the chair, wasn't it? Between the pins and the twins.
And so the real treaty stipulates that we should all be one nation and there should be no, I think it specifically says there should be no Māori seats on local councils. That was something Busby was pretty hot on.
It includes a link to the website that explains more.
Yeah, and from that, this is the basis for most of their beliefs. And from there, you spin out into wilder territory like the pre-Māori civilizations in New Zealand, where they all believe that there's an ancient race of Celtic people buried in forests up north, and that they lived in a peaceable and highly technologically advanced society before Māori settlement, whereupon they were killed by the savages. I mean, this is actually lunatic stuff, and I think if that sort of thing was foregrounded,
ironically though, ironic is probably not the right word, but this stuff sort of makes its way through New Zealand culture. A lot of this stuff is printed in the Franklin e-Local, which has a readership of 60,000 people. These guys publish books, Martin Dutray, that you can find in a lot of public libraries all around New Zealand.
Martin Dutray is a guy who paces out steps on the top of Mount Eden between rocks and concludes that it's actually an ancient astronomical observatory. From the pre-Māori civilization that lived in New Zealand.
Cool.
And they have some quite...
I read about that in Morris G. We've got Magramahi, Morris G. It's all historical texts.
Yeah, and they're sort of bankrolled by the likes of, Lewis Crimp and those ones. But, it's funny, but these guys were, not necessarily the ones in Hobson's Pledge, but basically that network were very involved in the Alan Titford saga that saw, the law change so that private land could no longer be claimed as part of a treaty settlement. And, as it turned, Te Roroa were completely vilified, abused, accused of being arsonists and all the rest of it. And as it turned out, Titford had burnt down his own house. But people like John Ansell are still very staunch supporters of him and, obviously anti-treaty and all of that stuff. So on one hand, it's funny, and on the other hand, it's actually quite serious.
So pause for seriousness there.
Thank you.
Just a moment to remember the pre-Māori people.
Yes.
We're all going to perform
in their secret graves.
A Celtic karakia.
Marama Davidson has recently returned from
her Mediterranean cruise.
That's right. Also known as the Free Gaza Flotilla, or anti against the blockade on Gaza that's been imposed by the Israelis. The boat was intercepted. They were taken to Tel Aviv, I think, and then she was deported. David Rankin, Annabelle, says she was an embarrassment to Māori.
Yeah, I think you'd find that most Māori wouldn't agree with what David Rankin says.
David Rankin sadly failed
and David Rankin does not speak on behalf of all Māori, despite what the Herald and TVNZ may think. But we actually sent our journalist, Ruani Porirua, on that Mediterranean cruise last year. And it's actually about raising awareness of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which I think is a pretty good cause, an interesting one, certainly from an Indigenous perspective. And I thought Key's comments off the back were a bit on the nose.
Key's comments, which was a kind of a classic of the form, was It's less than a perfect look. It's kind of, you can imagine the kind of scale of looks. Good look, bad
Was he
look,
talking about
less
the
than
humanitarian
perfect, excellent
crisis?
look,
Or?
the kind of political calculus and the needle on the level of look.
Well, look, I can understand Key's
Optics.
frustration with this. I mean, fresh back from the UN, he and Macaulay are basically on the brink of solving this whole Middle Eastern thing. And then Marama Davidson blunders in.
True. It's fucking the Maramas have got a lot to answer for. Marama Fox single-handedly destroyed Helen Clark's attempt of becoming the UN Secretary General. Now Marama Davidson has single-handedly destroyed hopes of peace in the Middle East.
It's just unbelievable, right? After Key's speech and everything. I agree with the Prime Minister.
Can I say, the irony about that is that West Papua, this is something that's happening on our back doorstep where we actually do have a little bit of leverage. And the government just is in absolute denial that there's any sort of issue there and refuses to do anything about it. But they go waltzing off to the UN to solve, the little run-in in the Middle East. It's bizarre.
Well,
why not address issues in our own region before taking on the Middle East?
Well, it's easy to be cynical, but we might want to take a moment now to just quietly reflect on how much progress has been made in Syria since the Security Council meeting.
Look. Let's move on again to the big issue. Again, John Key gave it some quite extended analysis. Do you think he was right, Annabelle, in his remarks about Aaron Smith and the sex in the toilet?
Who asked him?
I don't know who asked him.
Who was the reporter that
I'm
asked
guessing
him?
everyone.
Honestly, I've only been able to get one national minister to front up on our program this year. That was Hekia Parata. Good on her for doing it. And journalists are asking him about Aaron Smith. I have to say, as a journo, it really irritates me that of all the issues you could ask about, you're asking about Aaron Smith.
Thank
you, guys. Awesome.
But equally, he could say, I'm not answering that. Ask
Exactly. I totally agree with that as well.
What do you reckon, Ben? You think it's important, don't you?
I think there's a lot of the government's really heavily invested in Christchurch and the rebuild, and now it's turning into some kind of Gomorrah. Let's just, leave some sex for the rest of the country, Christchurch. There was a sex romp last year. There's people fucking in a toilet this year.
Well, that's true as well. John Key doesn't just have responsibilities for the rebuild of Christchurch, he also has responsibilities as captain of the All Blacks.
That's true.
So let's not forget that. Let's not forget either that if you want to listen to more Phil Goff related material, you should check out Warcast, the War for Auckland podcast, number 9 of which is somewhere floating around on the Spinoff website. But it's got Phil Goff on it, and Hayden, and Simon Wilson. And I think we're done. Thanks very much, Annabelle Lee. Thanks very much, Ben Thomas. Thanks, Madeline Chapman, on the controls, looking sort of almost about she's fallen to a deep sleep. For a minute there, she says. Thanks very much. We'll see you next month.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at the Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.